Hello there, it's Tom here, and this is chapter 27 of Gunnerkrigg Court, Spring Healed. And this chapter opens up pretty much straight into the action here, where we see Annie and Kat waiting outside the classroom, and old Jackie Boy running in, looking a bit worse for wear, and falling to the floor right in front of them. And just a word on Jack's appearance here. I really like how he looked in this chapter, and even though later on in the comic he sort of calms down a bit and reverts back to a more normal-looking boy, I think the way that he looks in this chapter basically defines how he looks later on in the comic, and I liked to keep this sort of disheveled look about him. I tried to show that he's been going through a few things and he's come out the other end a bit mangled up, and I tried very much to capture that in this chapter, not just the way that he looks and talks and his actions throughout the chapter, but also just the smaller details like his crazy grin and the bandages on his fingers, and even the way that I drew his raincoat on these pages. I like how it sort of flaps around and makes him look all disheveled and off-kilter. Another thing about the beginning of the chapter is that it's quite unusual in that we see Annie and Kat hanging around with a bunch of other kids from their class. It's pretty easy to forget that Annie and Kat are supposed to be in a school here, and I think at this point in the comic I'd really moved away from really focusing on the school activities. I think while I was happy to establish that they are in school, I felt that constantly setting the stories either in the classroom or around the classroom kind of limited the scope of the story, mainly because the classes themselves aren't particularly interesting. I didn't feel the need to really go to any lengths to show the reader that the classes the kids were taking were weird or wonderful in any way. They just take the usual like maths and science and history, geography, that kind of thing. So like 99% of the comic is stuff that happens outside of the classroom. So anyway, after Jack escapes out of a window, we see that he's being followed by these two people here. Atta, the short guy, and Shell, the tall woman. We don't see them very much, but we will see them again briefly later on. So Annie's been given a note by Jack, and it's telling her to meet him at that building where all the kids met up in the power station chapter. And he's even requesting to bring Renard along. Now, at this point in the story, Kat has grown her hair out a little bit, which is pretty unusual for Kat, but we also see that she's acting a little bit callous and mean, not just towards Jack, but just in her general attitude, and this is something that Annie and Renard talk about. And Renard figures that it's basically down to the stuff that she saw in the previous chapters, especially with the stuff that Diego had gotten up to. It's safe to say that she's feeling kind of disappointed and resentful to find out that the creator of these robots that she loves so much turns out to basically be a jerk. But Renard is confident that Kat will pull through. And anyway, a word on the way that the chapter looks, I guess. I sort of went back to the purple and greenish palette of the power station chapter because it's a colour scheme that I like very much. And they're colours that really come to define the court at night time. And a lot of the backgrounds in this chapter involve a lot of the elements that I enjoy drawing in the court. Things like industrial buildings and cityscapes in general. A lot of the backgrounds are based directly on reference photos that I've taken from Birmingham city centre, like a lot of the rest of the comic. So Annie and Renard find Jack, and they find that he has made a bridge across from the building to the edge of the lake surrounding the power station, and without too much explanation, he leads them out of the window and onto a boat, and they get rowing across the water. And I kind of like this scene, just the three of them in a boat talking about things. We learn a bit of what Jack's gotten up to, and we find out that he's really acting kind of crazy, and catch another glimpse of this white spider thing that's on his head. So once they cross the lake and come to the power station, they Scooby-Doo their way inside. And then I have this scene here which kind of disturbed a lot of people, which was intentional. This is the point in the chapter where it almost stops being fun now, and Jack has done something reprehensible. I've shown the robots in the court to be basically harmless and friendly creatures, and without much ceremony, Jack just smashes one completely with an iron rod. This is to show just how far off the deep end he's gone, because he's even been shown to be friendly towards the robots in the residential chapter. But unfortunately, this security robot ends up being a casualty of the plot, and from this point on, Annie is a lot more on edge around Jack and suspicious of what he's up to, which I guess is fair since he's acting pretty shady the whole time. I guess another word on the backgrounds to these sections. I was able to find a lot of reference pictures for the insides of actual working power stations. I found that the interior of hydroelectric plants and stations like that sort of fit what I was going for, because of the nature of this power station here. We learn later on that it's focused on gathering energy, and so I based a lot of the internals on that. I also had to create a lot of the backgrounds in basic 3D, just to get angles and such right. But I wanted a lot of the interior to look familiar and have that sort of industrial feel, and really be the kind of environment that has these big banks of computer terminals and buttons and switches that are just completely meaningless to anyone who who doesn't work there. But Annie and Renard poke around a little bit, and this is where they figure out that the antenna array in the power station is used to extract ether from the water, which is another recurring plot point that comes up throughout the rest of the comic. And this panel here is a photograph I took of my screen up close. I made a very basic big red button in Photoshop and then took a photo with my camera and put it into the comic. And as far as I'm aware, this might be the only actual photograph that I used as a straight-up panel, in the main comic anyway. So we see that Jack has an ulterior motive in mind, and he starts up the power station. His idea being that since he can't find Zimmy, he's going to get Zimmy to come to the building by the lake like she did last time the power station was active. And any attempts to reason with him just sends him off the deep end. And as they're escaping, Jack sets off a trap that he set for Renard. And we see that the reason he asked him to come along was to set him up, basically. We've seen this symbol before, and it's actually Anya's locking spell or mechanism. And since Jack has been rooting around in the computer system, he found it and was able to adjust it and use it in such a way that he was able to restrain Renard. And here, Jack says that Annie could easily leave Renard here and take the blame for what's been going on, but we see that Annie's very concerned with Renard, and she pushes him away, and she says that Renard is her friend, and so she stays. And old Jackie boy takes this as his cue to leave. We see that he has some other tricks up his sleeve, and flies away up to a window and escapes, leaving Annie to be discovered by this group of people and robots. And this is where the chapter ends, as a full-on cliffhanger, because I wanted to try something a bit different and set up the two chapters as a small contained story. And it was pretty fun. I enjoyed drawing the different backgrounds and having a bit more action than you'd find in a normal Gunnerkrigg chapter. And since the first chapter really deals with Jack and the stuff he's gone through, the second one will focus more on Zimmy and Jack and their interaction, with an extra helping of Jones on the side. And meanwhile, we can see in the bonus page that Kat's been worrying, since she knows that Annie and Renard are both out. And I drew this page around the time I found out that Mark Linkous, the leader of Sparkle Horse, has died, one of Kat's favourite bands, so she's wearing a shirt in tribute. Not really important, just a small detail. And that's that. Come back again for Chapter 28, Spring Hill Part 2.